My next guest on the Quantum Shift podcast is Allison Blackler. Allison is an award-winning mind coach, author, TEDx speaker, and founder of Two Minds, a transformational coaching practice focused on helping individuals and teams unlock clarity, courage, and resilience. With nearly 3 decades of experience studying human behavior, leadership, and mindset, Allison brings a deep understanding of how the conscious and subconscious minds shape performance, confidence, as well as communication. During the podcast, we explored the intersection of leadership, mindset, resilience, and behavior, as well as how understanding the architecture of thought can transform not just how you perform, but how you lead and live. Enjoy. Wanted to welcome you to the show and make sure that you were able to convey to everybody, I guess, where this all started, your journey. Like when you look back when you were younger, was there a moment that hinted to you that you'd end up doing this kind of work, helping people understand themselves like this? Has this always been something for you, like a calling for you?
I think that's a really brilliant question. And I think my answer to that is I did always know, but it took me a long time to find out what the no was. So I think when I was younger, I didn't have confidence at all. I doubted myself. I was very unsure and was very influenced by everybody else. And obviously, as a young person, of course, you're going to be influenced. That's part of how we learn. And then you start to navigate who do you want to listen to. So it took me a long time to sort of find my own feet. But I think my pursuit of that was the bit where I must have known to keep going, to keep asking questions, to keep reading, this was before the internet. So I was in libraries trying to make sense of things, this is all.
Isn't it funny? I feel like we're ancient when we say that. It's
I
like it's
know.
before the internet, and you actually had to go into a library with your library card and take a book out.
It does
It
make
is
me
the
sound,
most
I do
foreign
feel
idea.
old when I'm saying it, but I think it's important to know that for me, it goes back that far. And it would have been different trying to find answers for things then. I don't want to shy away from that. You can get a lot of answers at the tip of a couple of types in a computer these days. I didn't
Yeah.
have that. I didn't have that. And I was brought up by people who didn't talk about their emotions, who didn't give me the space to be able to explore what I was feeling and how I was feeling.
Were there people early in your life that made you feel seen or reflected your potential back at you? And it sounds like there may not have been.
No. I mean, I did have people, I suppose, without realizing, that were quiet cheerleaders around. But I think, my parents did the best they could, but it was very critical that, they obviously saw that as the way to get a child to do the right thing, was to be critical.
Did they remain that way through your adult life? Or was that just unfortunately the way they were? It's tough. Were there, um, was it like small gestures along the way, or was this really like you just said, hey, I get that this is the wrong way to be and I'm going to be different.
I'm sure there probably were people, but I don't remember till much later in my life when somebody actually started saying things like, I see you. I don't think I was accepted for who I actually was, and I was being molded into what they wanted me to be. And I know this is not a unique story. Lots of people find, parenting, and I'm not judging anybody or my parents when I say this, but people often want things for their children that they think they want. And actually it doesn't mean it's right for that child at all, because we are all our own person, aren't we?
Yeah, it is kind of a fascinating thing, especially as a parent, right? Where you see the nature of it all, and you're kind of like, I forget where I read it or said it, or somebody said this, where it's like you can't light the flame for them, but you can stoke the fire. And it seems like your flame was already lit inside of you. When did you first realize that you were observing people on a different level than most?
Yeah, I definitely noticed at school that people used to come and talk to me. So I was often the one that people would come and talk to, but I didn't. But again, when I look back, I didn't have anybody to talk to at all. And I think that was where I started maybe to self coach myself, because I didn't really feel like I had. I was often the person that everybody else came to, but what about me? It took me a long
So that's interesting because it's an interesting way. Yeah. So you're kind of questioning the world around you. Nobody's there to support you. So I guess at what point do you say this is what I was meant to do and this is my path? Like how old were you? Walk us
I
through
was
that.
well into my 20s, but even later actually, having, been in all sorts of situations, trying to find the answers, asking
Mm,
different situations and people. And I literally had this sense that this can't be it. The way that I'm thinking about myself and the way that I'm viewing the world, this can't be it. And I wanted to explore that. And remember, I know we laughed before and said, we sound really old, but I think it's really important to remember that I didn't have access to what we've got today. I had none of that
you
at
didn't
all.
have that information at your
Nothing.
fingertips.
You were literally with the friends that you knew, the people that you knew. That was where you got your information from.
So do you believe, I mean, it seems like you knew your purpose pretty early in life. Do you think your purpose chooses you or you choose your purpose? Was that sort of like a environmental thing and you kind of came out and found that yourself, or was that something that you feel like you were born to do?
I think what I'm doing, I feel very lucky that I was meant to do this. And I actually genuinely believe that some of the struggles I've been through, I had to do so that I can support others to navigate. So even the
Unpack that
rubbish.
for us. Yeah, I want to hear about those struggles. Like, tell us about that.
Yeah, so even some of the rubbish, even the feelings of self-doubt, the some of the relationship situations I've been in, some of the friendships I've been in where I haven't necessarily come out, on top, but I've learned so much. I genuinely believe that we learn the best stuff from the most difficult things. And I can honestly say I've been there. So every single thing I talk about, everything I've ever written, I can say I've been there. And I think that's really important, especially today.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. So when we talk about, I want you to describe, how do you describe the two minds that we live with? I want to hear from your mouth.
So I like to talk about the relationship we have between our conscious mind, which is the bit that you decide what you're going to do. So you set your goal and you say, I want to do this thing, whatever this thing might be. And then your subconscious or your unconscious mind is the goal getter. So I like to talk about the two minds being the relationship that you have between yourself. So you need to align the way that we're wired, all of us, with the way that you're wired, because we're
Mm.
all different. And everything that's ever happened to us will be influenced by this.
Well, I mean, it sounds like such an arduous task to unpack that for each individual. Can you walk us through how you help people find that and kind of make that a practical thing? Because I mean, I have a very smart friend who once said to me that he had drained some of the subconscious sludge, that he had been brought up with. And I thought that that was kind of a very vivid way of articulating it. But then I'm like, well, how do I get there? I'm not sure how to get to that. How do I open that subconscious door and drain that sludge? So tell us what that process might look like.
I like his metaphor, and if you do the work, it can absolutely feel like that. You will put yourself through it. I think for me, learning a little bit about kind of the neuroscience to start with. So learn a little bit about how we are wired so that you can see that some of it isn't you and it is the way that we're wired. So the human brain's primary job is to survive. So it will put you in a fight, flight, or freeze if it feels threatened. So if you perceive something as a threat, you will get a response. And I think if we understand that, it'll stop you getting down rabbit warrens thinking that other people are doing things to us. It's probably just a perception of threat. So even
Oh,
someone
that's
might
so
look across a
interesting.
room and kind of give a funny look and you perceive that as, oh, exactly.
Yeah.
So if you know that, it takes the pressure off. So that's before we've got
Mm.
into all the sludge. That's just, I think children should be shown this in schools so that we can
I
navigate
agree.
that emotional part of our brain, because it's there for a reason, and it will give you that feeling, whether that's a fight, flight, or freeze. It will give you that regardless.
So fascinating too, because I feel as if certain times in people's lives, they may feel like they have a little bit of control over that, but then other times it goes a little sideways. I'm speaking selfishly of myself, kind of I've known points in my life where things have gone really well, and I can kind of get some space and be like, that's not you. That's your reptilian, you know,
So
oldest portion of your brain reacting right now, and it has nothing to do with you. That look on that person's face, the way they said that thing is not. And I always used to say, oh, I'm sensitive. I'm so sensitive. Which was always, as a man, looked frowned upon. You're not supposed to be sensitive. You're not supposed to react to certain things like that. And I guess it leads me to probably many of us, uh, to our own detriment, may react inappropriately because of that. So I was going to ask you, which mind do you think most people lead with, and what's the cost of that? But I think I might know the answer. But maybe we'll talk about like if you want to talk about that, which mind do you think people lead with?
So emotionally, it is the unconscious mind. So that's where you'll get like you said, the reptilial brain will come. I always call that the fast train. So
Mm.
your reptilial brain gets involved 5 times quicker than any logic. So when you're able to go, oh, hold on a minute, that's not me, that you've already started to put your logic in because it's slower. You're giving yourself time to think. And that is actually all we can do, is manage that. I call it a piece of kit. You need to manage that piece of kit because it will give you that feeling. You might see somebody's name on a text and, that you will get that
It
feeling.
is so crazy,
It's so
right?
quick.
Yeah, and then it's almost it erodes, I think, at your self-confidence when you, especially in a work environment, when you realize that a human being can impact your emotional well-being from thousands of miles away with a text message. And then it's almost like it throws you, even if like if again, I can only speak from my own experience, but like we've all gotten a text from a boss at an odd hour, and you're never like, yay, what did they say? It's always,
Oh,
oh, or,
right.
you're either angry at them or angry at yourself, because then you're scanning and you're trying to figure it out. So then I've read through your work, and I think it's so important right now. And you work with leaders, but you don't start with leadership. You start with human. Firstly, how do you do that with leaders? Because we all know that leaders can, when you're talking about the ego and the super ego, some of the leaders are leading full on ego, and there's no humanity behind that. How do you reconcile that and help the humanity bubble up in an environment where you're working with leaders?
Well, I think with a lot of leaders, they'll have a lot of strategies that work well for them. They will, often they can manage some of that emotional brain. They've maybe got some strategies that help them because they've got so far up the ladder. They've made it in some ways. But often in that process, they're then forgetting about the differences of others. I mean, you mentioned before about, what's that feeling you get when somebody texts you? You know, a leader needs to appreciate that if they say to their uh, direct report, can I have a word? They need to appreciate that's a massive potential threat.
It's terrifying. Like, you just saying that, I'm like, oh, it's the
But
worst.
same in relationships, same in anything.
Oh,
It's perceived as a threat. Why? Because the human brain does fill in the gaps.
so then I suppose it's interesting, thinking about my last gig, and a young woman who's brilliant, like had her act together. Probably my best employee, Kat. Kat, if you're watching, you're the best. She remains the best. And I remember having a conversation with her once, and I had to bring her into another room, and she was like, and I started talking. She's like, "Oh my God, I was so scared." And this is a young woman that was like an A+ employee. I had never gotten upset with anything she'd ever done. She'd never been reprimanded for anything terrible. And I was like, "Oh my God, I'm sorry." And I think so. The reason why I'm bringing that up is because I had a good relationship with her, and I remain having a good relationship with her. we were able to talk about it, but I'm sure it happens a million times a day and people don't have that exchange and that discussion and it might fester. What are some of the tools that you work with leaders so that when they're communicating, they can, because it does sound like it tends to end up being, it all lands on communication, right? Whether that be like body language or verbally or text message or whatever. So maybe can we talk about that a little? Like, what are some of the tricks that you provide these leaders to do?
So for me, it's about being more conscious for them. So thinking about their communication. What is it that they're trying to say? Often they know what they're trying to say, but they don't think about the how. So when you're communicating your how, have you given as much certainty as you possibly can? And if not, say so. Have you, is there some level of autonomy inside that piece of request that you're being asked, you're asking somebody to do? Are you giving people some squeeze of choice rather than just telling people what to do, so you get a bit more collaboration? Does it feel fair, for example? If it doesn't feel fair, say so. So for me, it's all about trying to sort of build that relationship up with the people that you are communicating with. But the other really interesting thing, which all leaders will say, oh my gosh, is each person in the room, if you've got 10 people, 100 people, 1,000 people, everybody will interpret it differently anyway. So
Yeah.
it is difficult, but I always talk to leaders about what is it that people are saying at the dinner table about you. And it'll always be the how it was dealt with, how it was communicated. Very rarely are people bothered about the what. They want to feel heard, they want to feel valued. Even if it's a no, there's still a skill in being able to say no without letting somebody feel disheartened with their ideas. Because, your team have got amazing ideas if you're a leader.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
actually leaders sometimes forget about that.
So interesting because I feel like uh, everything that you're saying feels intuitively correct. And it also, I know how intuitively difficult it can be, especially when you're in the thick of it, right? Like I've had a tendency in my career, I've worked with very early stage startups and things can get really intense and not intense in terrible ways, intense in fun ways, intense in, you know, putting out fires, but doing it together as a team. And sometimes when you're communicating, it doesn't come across certain ways and it gets a little bit lost in the mix. Are there specific tactical things that you provide to the leaders to do? The reason why I'm asking this, I'm asking about like specific tactical things, and you may not, it might just be more about like having them think about how it's being received on the other end. But Brene Brown, I saw recently on Diary of a CEO, and she was talking about trust and like this, trust being a jar of marbles, and that every bit of, every time you instill trust in your relationship with somebody, it's a marble, but it could be as little as, you know, hey, how are you? How's your mom doing with the chemo? Right. Like inquiring about something like that. And then that's the end of the conversation. And then when you've done that over time, you've articulated trust among your team that when things go haywire and you ask them to do something, they do it.
Yeah.
That it's not, you gotta trust me. Like you're like, it's almost like you don't trust the person that says trust me type of thing. You know? so, so I'm wondering, like, are there ways when you're working with leaders, do you have them go through like workshopping it, like literally like, I've been a career sales guy and we would practice getting on phone calls and talking to people. Do you do that? Is that something that you work when you work with them?
Yeah, it's fairly experiential in that I'm not telling them things. I use models that I help them then be able to look at their own situations. So there's no role play, but we bring the real conversation in. So we look at unpacking relationships and situations that aren't going well. I use a model for giving feedback. I talk about how they help, how they offer help. I talk about things like how well you listen. Do they actually listen? So I'm kind of giving them an experience in the sessions to help them see exactly what goes on, because as you rightly say, we all know this stuff, but when
Yeah.
it's all pressure and the deadlines are looming and everyone is panicking, all this goes out the window. Because people say to me, Of course, everyone, I'll often ask the question, do we remember that everyone's different? Yeah, of course, everyone's different. But when the pressure's on, we forget and everybody just suddenly becomes the same as me. So I'll just do it the way I think because, of course, that'll land. Of course, everybody will understand what I'm saying. And,
Such a
and of course,
disaster
it
when that
just
happens.
goes like that. And then everyone's like, what happened there? And then,
Yeah.
and I see leaders so disheartened because they've had an amazing idea. Sometimes I get brought in because they've had an amazing idea. They've tried to communicate it. It went rubbish. And then now they're really disheartened and they're like, it's failed. And all you need is just to bring a bit more collaboration and a bit more variety in terms of how different people show up. What is it? Praise, for example. Leaders often don't really value praise anymore because they've got to the top of the tree and there isn't anybody else to give them praise. So they don't value it anymore. But their teams will be crying out for it. So a leader that needs to be flexible, even though it's your style might not be, I need feedback, but actually your teams might. And working out, who is it that needs to hear the well dones and who is it that needs to have more explanation? Who is it that needs to hear things in a different way? Because if we do one size fits all, we'll get one result. And that's usually not that great.
Yeah, I mean, it could go haywire. I was used to say I would praise publicly and give feedback privately. And even like borderline feedback, nothing, it didn't have to be terrible, but those were always for the one-on-ones. I never, even if anything could be misconstrued as potentially, no,
Yeah,
only,
good
hey
strategy.
guys, great job, pat on the back publicly, and on privately, you could have that conversation. Um, Typically, when you're working with teams, at what stage is it? Is it that scenario, like you said, where a leader's trying to communicate an idea and the team just isn't behind them? Like it's, I picture them like, "Let's go," and they're like running. It's like
Everyone else goes that way.
Will Ferrell saying, "We're streaking," and nobody's streaking with him. There's nobody behind you. Is that typically the scenario that you come in to work
I
with these
think
leaders?
I think I either I've been brought in where there's a very ambitious organization and they're doing lots of amazing things and they just want more, so I do often have that, but it generally is when it's not quite going well, they're not getting the buy-in, they're not having the accountability. Commonly, and this is again, I know you're just going to smile at this one, people get promoted because they're good at the job, but they don't know how to lead people. And again, you'll come with the style that you've always used or seen.
It's the biggest. It's the big. It's the.
But it's
It's
just
the.
still a thing. It's still a massive thing. And I always feel so when I listen and because I do a lot of one-to-one, and when I listen to people who've had that situation, so they were maybe technically one of the best people in the company, absolutely flying, and then they get promoted and now they're really miserable. They don't know what they're doing. Their teams are miserable and it's just awful. It's awful for everyone.
Yeah, yeah. I see that a lot. Um, and it, I got good at figuring it out because it happened to me very early in my career, and I couldn't understand why I was terrible in the leadership role that I was in. Because, like you said, and this must be something you deal with all the time. I was so confused that the team wasn't wired the way I was, and that they didn't ingest information the way that I did, and that they didn't go about their workday the manner with which I did. And that was a very, years in the making type of flip upside down of like, okay, there are human beings that, and it's the reason why I'm now working with a young man in his early 20s where we go into organizations to talk about the differences in generations because he was kind of, an flip way. He's like, I tell young people that, if they want to work, if they want to come in later in the morning and work later at night, that should be a good thing. And I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. That's not a good thing. And he's like, well, what do you mean? Even if I say that, I'm going to be more productive. And I said, no, Gen X. I'm like, I'll look at you and I'll say, dude, when I was your age, I was told when to show up, when to go to the bathroom, when to stand up, when to sit down, when to jump up on one leg. And I just said, yes, okay. And I'm like, that causes cognitive dissonance between generations because of the communication. And I think that that happens very often with leaders when they get promoted too too quickly and into the wrong role, where they could be in sales, they could be a lone wolf sales executive that closes $10 million a year before they even get out of bed, but they could be awful
Indeed.
dealing with people. So I want to give you the opportunity now to brag about your work. Like in your work, tell us about a moment or two or three when someone truly transformed and you're kind of like, I did that. Tell us about it.
So, yeah, I think I got many. One particular story stands out where I was working with an accountancy firm, and there would have been about 23 in the room. They were all directors and next managers down, and they weren't communicating well at all. And actually, one of the things that came out of the sort of investigation was there was a lot of wasted time, like huge, terrible time, drama. So people getting involved in things, people getting pulled in to try and sort something out, really bad. And actually just being able to air all that and actually look at it was so, so good for them to just be able to say, hang on a minute, let's get some better strategies so people could have conversations. Have difficult conversations is something that I encourage people to have healthy debates so that people, again, you mentioned before about, if you don't have good conversations, then when you really need to have a difficult conversation and you haven't had anything, that'll come in as oh my gosh, there's no warning for this at all. So I think being able to do that um allows people to um yeah to reduce time. One of the things I love them to keep an eye on is, are their meetings shorter? Because they are using models that really get them focused, bring their attention. And then again, for me, the best feedback I get is when people just see each other. They just see each other as different, and actually leaning into that. That to me is so important because, again, whether you're a leader, whether you're a team manager, whether you're a team member, to be heard, regardless of who you are, is something that I try to create.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's so important. I do think that in my career, younger executives have taught me that. Like really, the younger generation is very good at articulating that they are different and being comfortable saying we're different. And I've learned a lot throughout my career. Um, I'm thinking about the team of Products Up if you guys are watching. We had a bunch of young business development representatives that became really dear friends. I did an onboarding for a couple of Products Up for a month in Berlin. And I remember thinking, the founders, I was like, why am I onboarding for a month? And they knew that I needed to get to know these human beings that I would be collaborating with, that would be on my team. And it was so impactful for us to be social and to work and to have dinners together and to do that. And I'm wondering, as I'm having that recollection of, I was like, wow, I onboarded for a month. That was crazy. Like, why did I do it for so long in Berlin? It was such a fun time. And I think it worked because I did become friends with many of them and lots of mutual respect going around. Do you encourage out of office like activities and dinners and, because sometimes I feel like organically when I did the onboarding, obviously I'm in New York, I was in Berlin for a month and I was, at an executive stay type situation. So I needed friends for dinner every night. I was like, hey guys, let's go out to dinner. And we all went out to dinner. Um, and I was buying. So of course everybody came, right? But I think about forced social stuff that in throughout my career and I cringe. Is there like a medium? Like, is there a middle ground that when you work with teams that you're helping to facilitate socially, or is that not something you're not a yes? I'll shut up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think for me, building relationships up with people to get to know people. Now, sometimes, leaders often will say, gosh, there isn't time for that. It pays back so much to get to know
Yeah,
somebody
dividends.
genuinely. Sometimes to be able to push the list of tasks aside and say, how are you? What, no, it would never say, who are you? But, find out. I think the team building side of it, I think can be done well, but also can be done really cheesy and not very nice.
Yeah.
People definitely smell the difference between something
Oh
that is
yeah.
genuine. So I definitely don't advocate that. I think socially, it's I've seen quite a lot of businesses where they, what should we say, they kind of spoil their staff with gifts and Christmas and meals out and parties and things. And actually, that isn't always what people want. People actually want to feel heard by their manager, by their leader. They want somebody to actually see them. So if you ever did a survey of people, do you want the party and the bottle of wine, or do you want your manager or the senior team to actually sit down with you and say, thank you for your contribution. This has been noted. And a lot of people would go for that.
Yeah, they just want the pat on the back. It's so nuts. It's a running theme with this podcast. Like anybody that does work similar to yours, like working with executives and leadership, it's just they just want gratitude. They just want to say
Want
thank
to
you.
feel appreciated, and that motivates them then to do more, to come up with ideas. I mean, you mentioned before about the generations. You'll know that that's a topic I talk about. I've done a TEDx talk, as you know, and again, what people used to value 20 years ago from a leader is changing. And I think we've got to think about,
Yeah.
what is it that people really want? They want quality feedback. They want meaningful, inspirational leadership. They don't necessarily want the pizzas on a Friday or I'm sure they'll have the pizzas on a Friday. Don't get me wrong.
But they want substance. They
I
want
think they do.
so that's a perfect segue because I adored your TEDx talk, and I think it rang a big bell for me. And it's part of the reason why we're speaking now is because of that generational gap and how you and I kind of bonded over it in our first conversation. Because I do feel like it's so important, and I hadn't really considered doing any of this type of work until this young man came into my life and he started doing the work. And I was like, wow, wouldn't it be powerful if the two of us went into an organization and had that conversation? Walk us through, for those of you that haven't seen your TEDx talk, they will after this, but tell us about the TEDx talk. Like, what's the main message? What were you trying to convey, and convey it here for us, please?
So for me, opening the door to ask people to wonder how often they judge somebody based on age in any situation, but particularly in a work situation. The reason why I think it's really important that we don't jump to conclusions about people is we are missing out if we do that. So we've got vocabulary, the boomers, the Gen X, the millennials, the Gen Zs, and we've got a set of descriptions that go with each one. And while there are definitely trends depending on what was going on in the world when we were all born, yes, but they are not an absolute end decision. They're not an end description, sorry. So for me, it's about being open to the possibilities that people who are of a different age may bring. And that might be the younger generation who've got most amazing ideas, and equally the wisdom of someone older. But I think one of the things that I'm really interested in is, are the younger generation holding up a mirror to what actually is going on? Because we, like you said, coming in late and working later. Oh my goodness me, that's not a badge of honor. But actually, what are they showing us? Because some of the burnout and some of the things that I'm hearing going on is showing, isn't showing us that going on like this isn't working. So I'm
Yeah.
wondering about this, what these younger ones are doing for us and their attitudes to things. I'm really
Yeah.
curious about.
Yeah, that they could actually teach us things. And I think it's funny because, and I know that we talked about this the first time we spoke, and this young man, Will, when we talked about it, I was like, it's difficult intellectually. I may know that that approach is better. You might say, I'm better if I sleep in and I work really late. Cause I'm like, wow, when I was young, that's the way I was too. And boy, wouldn't have that been great if my boss allowed for that. But there is this bizarre psychological thing that happens where it's almost like hazing, where it's like, well, I was told that I had to be there at a certain time and it was awful. So you're going to have to do the same thing because what? So I think if Gen X and boomers can get over that hump, and even like older millennials, of saying there is a better way, you will get more out of people if you allow for them to have a life and to go to their kid, drop their kid off at work in the morning and be able to have like a meaningful send off for their child. They'll work like an animal for you. I do think it's difficult for executives that have been in large organizations for many, many years. I'm a startup guy. And I think when I ran my own business, my first business that I started was 13 minutes away from my home. And people were like, why didn't you do your office in the city? Because I live in the suburbs of New York and I put the office in White Plains. And I said, because in my mind, I knew that I personally wanted to put my daughters on the bus every morning, and that was a non-negotiable. I will be the one putting my daughters on the bus in the morning, period. My wife had to get off to work. She was working mom. And I knew that I didn't want to have somebody in between, a nanny or somebody else doing that. And I think had I been working for somebody and not been an entrepreneur, they probably would have said, no, you need to be at your desk. And it would have been a huge problem. So I am, when you imagine the future of work, like leadership and psychology, where do you see us heading? You must see some good things. Like you're at the tip of the spear with these massive changes happening in organizations. Where do you see people that you're working with really embracing this and really, especially people in our generation? Are they a little bit more open-minded? Are they, willing to hear the feedback that you're giving them?
I think it is still a mixture. I think there are still a risk that people will continue to do the same thing that they've always done without realizing that there's an alternative. I think they might make that change when it's gone wrong, which would be nice if we could do that before then. But then I think there's also a curiosity and an appetite to do things differently. And I think that's where the opportunities are. That's what excites me. When we can look at the younger generation and judge them and say, oh, they're all entitled and lazy and all these things. And they're none of those things. They are none of those things. They are speaking up for themselves. They've got real clear direction about what they want. They know how they want to be led. We never knew any of those things. So I think we need to really harness this and listen. But equally, we need to be careful around making sure that we don't, that they don't think that everybody who's old hasn't got a clue what they're talking about and lots of things. So for me, it's that
Well,
relationship between the two.
and I think the way you did it in your TEDx talk was so powerful for me. And I kind of I really would love it if you retold the beginning, where you lead with your own experience as a young employee. And I've never really heard anybody do that. And it was very impactful for me because it's rare that when you hit a certain level of an executive that you can really extract yourself from that and remind yourself, hey, you were 22 once also. And don't you remember how humiliating that was when you messed up and you did whatever, like walk us
Yeah.
through that beginning portion.
Yeah, so for me, I take everyone back to when I was 19 and I'd left college, new to work, and I wanted to impress my boss. He asked me to do a presentation. So I got to work and I did go for it. I used vibrant colours, loads of images, and hardly any text. Was so delighted with myself. And then when I showed it to him, he was just like, what? Where's all the information? Where's all the data? And yet I thought I'd created this really fabulous thing. And then he conversely must have thought, oh, flipping heck, this generation, they don't know what they're doing. They're coming up with all these wacky ideas. And the disheartenment for me, even if it was wrong, I think this is where leadership, where we've got room for, even if it wasn't what he wanted, he could have said it differently, because it could have kept me like sort of feeling engaged in the conversation. And these very small things, people remember these small things, don't they? They always say, don't they, what do you remember out of a conversation? Well, it's actually how you felt.
How you felt.
It's
Yeah.
not anything else. So the sort of impact of how do we hear each other's ideas? How do we get curious about, well, they might just see something that I haven't even thought of. What made that presentation wrong in his
Mm.
head was just because he had an idea how he wanted it to go. But what if one of my ideas was something that was exciting to embrace? And I think that's the bit that I would, would love people, because when everybody has heard my TED talk, they've always said, "God, we all do that thing. We really do." We go, "Oh, what do they know? They're really old," or these youngsters, they haven't got a clue what they're doing. Well, we've all got brilliant stuff. It doesn't matter how old we are. And I think, when we look at how do we get that information out to people, how do we create cultures in businesses where everybody's ideas are welcome, and not in a idealistic, fluffy kind of way, or we'll have a suggestion box, something that's really like meaningful and tangible. That's what we need.
Yeah, I agree. And it's funny when you brought that up, I very much identified with you though, because as a sort of career sales guy, I used to pride myself on having almost no text in any of my PowerPoints because it was conversational. I'd be trying to get information and it was just look at the image. That's fine. And boy, do I remember bosses not being happy about that and be like, well, what are you going to, you're going to leave a picture as a leave behind? Like they'll read it afterward. And I'm like, well, that's not what the presentation is for. Like they could read about the contract later and the details of it later. And the reason why I'm bringing that up is because I'm like, sometimes it's both. Sometimes it's like, you're both right. It just didn't, it was about the communication. It's like, okay, make the presentation pretty pictures, but create a leave behind with heavy text so that they could redline it and do whatever. And sometimes that's just a cultural thing.
But it's the no,
Um,
isn't it? It was the no, that's wrong. That
yeah,
that I was left,
devastating, devastating.
I was left feeling absolutely heartbroken that I'd put all my heart and soul into something. And what was really interesting is we could reverse this slightly. And had I been given more instructions, because I wasn't,
Yeah.
and, again, if you're a leader and you want to give clear instructions to somebody, still give them autonomy within that, still allow them to have some level of choice. But what about giving clearer instructions in the first place?
It's a big deal too. And I think being able to be a leader and articulate the manner with which you work and operate and the things that you look for, it got me to, I forget where I got it from, but about 6 or 7 years ago, I learned that, to create an executive user guide, like a user guide for me, for my teams, and say like, if you really need me, like, I'm not going to pick up the phone. You can text me and I will respond to a text. If have, like the manner with which they should communicate with me, the things that I look for, the way that I present. And that became a huge game changer for me because then it removed any sort of generational things. It was like, this is the way we do things. Like this team, the sales team does it this way. And, if you have suggestions, cool, but that would be part of onboarding. I would give them the Chris Desi executive user guide and they'd all laugh, but like, they'd be like, oh yeah, thanks for letting us know. Cause then it's like, people don't know what your pet peeves are.
Exactly.
They'll find out,
Exactly.
but they might not know them in advance. And if they do know them in advance, they're like, oh, yeah, I remember I had a young executive, when I was running Silverback, we're talking 15 years ago. And I remember asking the team, there were 3 young guys that I just hired. And I was so excited that my agency was big enough that I could pay for these young men to be on my team. And I remember saying, guys, I need you to conduct your due diligence on this account. And like 20 minutes later, they were chit-chatting about something else. I'm like, fellas, what are you doing? Like, conduct your due diligence. And one of the guys turned to me and said, like, show us how. What do you mean? And I was like, oh, okay. Like, it just didn't even dawn on me. Like, I was moving so fast and I was just like, okay, what does due diligence mean in this environment, under this umbrella, in this advertising agency, when looking at that business? And I messed up. I didn't give them those rails to run on in those parameters, which I think is really powerful. So I do think you're doing incredible work. And I think, do you find that there are patterns in the industries that you're working with when you're consulting for these businesses? Like, where are you finding are the most issues or people that are most receptive to your message, I suppose?
I seem to somehow specialize in a lot of professional services, so accountants, lawyers. And what I notice, and this is not me saying anything that I don't say to them, so I'm not
Be
saying,
careful.
no,
They're going to get very
don't
upset with
worry, they will know this about themselves.
you.
They are brilliant at attention to detail, turning every stone, finding the problem, brilliant in their work. But if you do that with all their people, it upsets people. So they find that their natural talent isn't useful or as useful in their management leadership work as it would be in their accountancy, law. And they can't understand or need help to see the relationship between, you can't manage your people like you do your spreadsheets or your law firms or your this. So that's been one of the most interesting things, and again, they often or sometimes can be more introvert as well by the
Yeah.
nature of their work. So people, I've got one guy in my mind, and he's like, oh, why are they so hard, the people? Because they are, and he says, give me a set of accounts any day, because he would prefer to get right into the detail, really find the problem. That's their job, is to flush out the problem. You can't do that with people. You have to do it in a very different way to be able to do that. So I find that that's been really a good pattern to spot. And
What a fascinating way to look at it. And I don't know that I ever really heard anybody articulate it, right? It's that what's made you successful in your job will not make you successful when you're managing your
mm,
team. It's a different skill set.
yeah, yeah.
That's a mind blower. And it's funny because it goes the other way around. Because I'm no wallflower. And I know throughout my career that has not been very well received by introverts on my teams. They're like, they thought I was yelling at them.
Yeah. You're like,
Like,
it's
I
too
remember a
much.
very specific instance. I remember saying, like, somebody who said, "Oh, the marketing team is doing whatever," and I'm like, I cursed and I said, I don't give a fuck the marketing team is doing." And a young woman on my team was crying. And I was like, what are you crying about? Why are you crying? You just yelled. We don't care about it. I'm like, what? Huh? Like, it was just like the way I was emoting, and it scared the heck out of this poor girl. And I was like, oh no, I didn't mean to do that. So yeah, definitely goes in the other
I
direction.
think in the other direction as well, if you've got uh, people at the top, founders, entrepreneurs, real high pace thinkers, idea generators, your head's like literally constantly full of the next project, you can be really tiring to a lot of people. You are too much. And actually, I often end up working with the leader to try and not slow them down, because you want them to keep coming with the amazing ideas. But if you're trying to lead people, they won't keep up with you in that speed. It's not their business, so they won't work as hard as you, as the founder or as the entrepreneur. So I think that's the other pattern I see, is when you get a real high flyer at the top who's just got so many ideas and so much energy and comes bouncing around like Tigger. And then everyone else is a bit like, oh,
Uh,
oh.
That one stings. Tigger, I've heard that. Yeah. I'm like, oh, I had to open up my laptop. The Logitech camera just died. Let's talk about the future of Allison's work. Where are you focusing? Where is the TEDx talk taking you?
Mm.
Where is the writing taking you? Where do you see yourself going with this work? You know, let's hear it all.
So I am excited to change not what I'm talking about, but where I go, because I have done nearly 30 years worth of one-to-one. And while I love one-to-one and I do enjoy helping somebody, I genuinely think the way that we are all wired and how we compare ourselves and how we often think that we are the only ones, I actually believe that my work needs to go where others hear it, but they're with others while they're hearing it. Because I think that in itself takes the pressure off. Because when you're in a group or you're with others and you realize that while everyone's unique, we are all similar, it's like a pressure cooker's just been released. It's like, oh, you too. I run a group coaching program every 6 months. Well, I have one that it runs for 6 months. I usually start them before the 6 months. And on that, we deep dive. There's 8 people and we deep dive and we learn together. And they come with me on a live session and we do questions and hot seating every 2 weeks. And the stuff that they are working on together is unbelievable. So they're working on their own stuff, but then they're coming together. And I think that helps people hear from other people, hear other people's strategies. I might try that. Oh, I'm inspired because you made that work. So I'm going to have a go. I feel less alone. I think we need this. So I would like to do more of that. And also working with teams so that they can hear each other's differences and support that. But also, yeah, from a TEDx point of view, to talk on other stages, dare I say, around the world. I'd love to come to the States and speak on
Yeah,
on stages there, because I think people need to hear the real stuff. There is a lot of people speaking about all of this stuff, but I often feel that they mislead and make it look like it's easy, and it's possible, but it's not easy. And I
it's
want to
hard
be
work.
Brené Brown, you mentioned earlier, like she's one of my heroes. She talks
Mhm.
about the real stuff. And
Yeah,
I,
yeah,
I
yeah,
love that about her. And she's been somebody I've admired for years for that reason. And I'm the same. I want to talk about the real stuff.
yeah. I think she's got guts. I think she can walk into a boardroom and be like, "Enough of the BS, fellas. Like this is the real
And I do
stuff.
that.
Let's talk about it."
I do that. I challenge, I do challenge founders, leaders, people who need to. I will have that difficult conversation and say, I'm not going to beat around the bush. This is what I'm seeing. This is what I'm noticing. And I think people can then make that change more
Yeah.
likely then.
When people are, when do you find people calling you the most? Is it when the things are kind of like, are they ever intuitive enough that when things are going well, they say, "Hey, I want this to continue. How do we sustain this?" Like, is there ever that scenario?
I have had that, definitely. Really
Yeah.
ambitious firms.
Yeah.
I've got a couple in mind where they, their leadership style was really positive, really innovative, and they wanted to offer their teams a better opportunity. They wanted their managers to have skills. But then conversely, it's when it's gone wrong and the numbers aren't crunching, or they're losing a load of people, or they've got issues, complaints where they've got people, managers who are causing havoc, basically. And sometimes it's the founder at the top causing trouble. Sometimes it's when you've got somebody who's retiring. That's quite common.
So that's interesting.
Somebody, yeah, so somebody who's probably been very, very senior, and then they're now retiring and they're kind of trying to hand the reins over to somebody else. And then what is all of and the other side that's quite interesting is family businesses. That can be interesting.
So I love that you said that because I feel like there's another young woman who I'm a little bit obsessed with right now. And I'm looking at her book. Her name is Cody Sanchez, and she wrote a book called Main Street Millionaire. And she talks about one of the biggest opportunities right now in business around the globe is that transition that you're talking about, like family businesses where there's a boomer who doesn't have a predecessor, doesn't have somebody that's going to come in behind them, and they don't know where to start when it comes to selling their business. And her whole take is, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a business minded person, that you should approach these business owners about, she calls it seller funded acquisition, where you kind of name your number. Oh, I want $5 million to retire and sell this company. And then the person comes in and can earn that equity as they go over time with some of the work that they're doing. But how those transitions are so difficult and nuanced. And I could imagine in that scenario, people really needing your skill set and that your approach to things and how to solve business problems, because they don't even have another generation behind them in the office, right? It's just the way they've always run things, um, which can be really impactful. So how can people get in touch with you? For executives that are watching this right now that want to work with you and say, "Oh, I need Allison in our office," like, how do they go about doing that?
I mean, I think the first thing I always want to say to everybody, I am always open to a conversation, no pressure. I think I love people. I love listening to people. I love understanding what's going on for them. I can often hear what they're not saying, so I can kind of hear and maybe give them some insight. So, I'm not here to sell all the time. I just love having conversations. I try and put some meaningful content into LinkedIn, which I believe is a good place for us to share real stories and really good information. So again, I try and put something in there that's not BS and something that's useful. But also, I'm always open to somebody saying, "Well, can you talk about this?" Challenge me to talk about something, and let's see if I can think of a scenario that is, you know, could be a good conversation.
Is there a book? Is there anything that's coming out that you could talk about?
There's definitely not another TEDx. I think there's one TEDx. It's quite an experienced TEDx. I do have a probable business type book in me because I feel that my two books that I've got are almost my offers. So, first book is a relationship with yourself. So I do a lot of work around people. I have, I do still do, but have done a lot of relationship work, individuals who are either in a relationship and it's not working or having problems with the relationship. That's my second book. And then the rest of my work is in teams. So I feel like if I was going to do the three,
The
I
team.
need the third
Yeah, yeah.
third book. So maybe 2026 might be that.
Well, that's exciting. Then we'll have to have you back on. Well, hopefully there aren't any more technical difficulties and we can speak a bit longer. But it's been an absolute joy having you on the podcast. Thank you so much. I think the work that you're doing is really important, and that's not a platitude. You know that I'm attempting to do some work similar to the work that you're doing, and I think I see collaboration on the horizon for us. I think between you in the UK, me in New York, I'm sure that there'll be many things that we can work on. And I do think I want to say I'm in terms of events and speaking, I'm trying to put together two different events that will be remote, that will be online, and hopefully we can have you come and speak about maybe some of the teamwork that you're doing. I like the three levels of that, like your own work, the one-on-one work, and then with the team. I think that dynamic would be really interesting. Um, but I thank you so much again for coming on.
Thank you for having me. And definitely collaboration is the way forward. Definitely.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much for watching the Quantum Shift podcast. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, like, and share. Thanks so much.